My name is Stella Janes. I am 29 years old. There is a distinct sound a phone makes when an internet mob decides you are the enemy. It is a steady, relentless vibration that does not stop. I woke up at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday to 47 missed calls. My screen was a waterfall of notifications. My sister Ruby had just posted a video to her 3 million followers. She sat in a velvet booth at the Aura Casino Resort. The lighting was carefully curated to catch the tears on her cheeks. The performance was flawless. The caption read, "Some betrayals are unforgivable. My own sister refused to help save my business. She is dead to the family." Hundreds of comments were already pouring in. Strangers were calling me toxic, selfish, a parasite. They were tagging my employer. They were demanding I be held accountable. I sat on the edge of my bed in my quiet Henderson condo and watched the view count climb. I did not cry. I did not call my parents to ask how they could let her do this. I walked into the kitchen. I poured a cup of black coffee. I opened my laptop. I initiated a secure data capture of her post, archiving the comments, the view metrics, and the server timestamps. Before I explain how a self-proclaimed Vegas billionaire accidentally started a digital war with a data analyst, please take a second to hit like and subscribe to Luke Vengeance. Drop a comment telling me your age and where you are listening from. It helps more than you know. Now let me tell you about Las Vegas, Nevada. Tourists think it is a city of wealth. Locals know it is a city of leverage. A place built on mirages, where the line between a high roller and a bankrupt fraud is a single unpaid marker. My sister Ruby is 25. She lives for the neon. She portrays herself as the queen of the strip, constantly posting from VIP tables draped in designer brands. I work as a senior data analyst and digital forensics specialist. She builds her life on optics and filters. I spend my days deep in server architecture, tracing hidden digital assets and corporate financial anomalies. I have spent my entire life being the invisible workhorse. I am the person my parents call when a mortgage application gets complicated or a computer crashes. Ruby is the person they call to brag about to the neighbors. When I bought my condo with my own savings, my mother asked if Ruby could use my spare bedroom to store her overflow wardrobe. When Ruby bought a new sports car, my father took us all out for a celebratory dinner. I learned early that competence was expected and extravagance was rewarded. I sat at my kitchen island and watched the screen. Ruby had weaponized her audience to execute my reputation. She wanted me terrified. She wanted me to beg for forgiveness and hand over my savings to make the hate stop. But Ruby made a fatal error. She started a public war with a woman who dismantles digital footprints for a living. My phone buzzed on the granite counter, a voicemail from our mother Linda. I hit play. Her voice was sharp-edged with panic rather than sadness. She did not ask for my side of the story. She demanded I issue a public apology and immediately wire Ruby the $250,000 she asked for the night before. I listened to the message twice. I archived the audio file into a secure folder. Then I looked at the number, $250,000. That was the amount Ruby had screamed for in my living room less than 72 hours ago. My mother believed it was for a VIP lounge renovation at the casino. But I look at numbers all day. Renovation budgets do not land on an exact $250,000 in cash needed within 48 hours. Margin calls do. Someone was calling in a debt. I set my coffee down and started typing. I was going to find out who. Las Vegas is a city that manufactures consent through sensory overload. It is a geographical anomaly built on the promise that you can be anyone you want if you possess the right wardrobe and enough available credit. People arrive here and surrender to the architecture of excess. The resorts are windowless labyrinths designed to make you forget the time of day, the current season, and the balance in your checking account. Ruby thrives in that specific ecosystem. If you pull up her profile on any given afternoon, you will find a carefully curated gallery of synthetic perfection. She is always standing on a balcony overlooking the fountains or holding a sparkler attached to a bottle of imported vodka in a dimly lit nightclub. Her followers believe she is a titan of industry. They call her a mogul. They buy the overpriced cosmetics she promotes and defend her honor in comment sections because they desperately crave proximity to her perceived power. They want to believe the lie because the lie is beautiful. My reality operates below the neon lights. As a digital forensic specialist, my job is to examine the invisible infrastructure that keeps those beautiful fictions running. I track information packets, verify offshore routing numbers, and uncover the buried spreadsheets that executives try to permanently delete right before an external audit. Ruby sells the fantasy. I prosecute the reality. We grew up under the same roof in a stucco suburban tract house just 20 minutes from the Strip, but we were raised under entirely different paradigms. My parents, Linda and Thomas, worshipped at the altar of appearances. My father ran a mid-tier commercial real estate brokerage that always seemed to be one bad quarter away from shuttering its doors. My mother viewed local social climbing as a competitive sport, attending charity galas in dresses she returned the next morning. When Ruby was born 4 years after me, she arrived with bright eyes and an innate ability to perform for an audience. She learned early that smiling at the right people yielded immediate dividends. I learned that staying quiet and fixing the broken home network router earned me a brief nod of approval before they went back to watching my sister practice her pageant walk. By the time I was in high school, the roles were permanently cemented into the foundation of our family. I was the reliable utility. Ruby was the prized asset. To understand how my sister felt emboldened to demand $250,000 from me, you have to understand the precedent our parents established. When I graduated from university with honors and secured a competitive corporate position, my parents hosted a modest dinner at a chain Italian restaurant. My mother spent half the meal taking photos of Ruby in a new designer outfit. 2 years later, when Ruby secured a coveted verification checkmark on her social media profile, my father rented out a private dining room at a high-end steakhouse and bought her a watch that cost more than my first car. It was never about actual achievements or financial stability. It was about optics. They viewed my steady income as a backup generator for the family, meant to be kept in the dark until the power went out. Ruby was the chandelier they wanted everyone to see. That brings me back to the voicemail sitting in my secure digital archive. I played it again, letting my mother's panicked voice fill the quiet space of my kitchen. Stella, this is ridiculous. Your sister is in tears. You have the money sitting in some retirement fund doing nothing. Aura is expanding and she needs liquid capital to secure the vendor contracts for the new VIP lounge. Stop being petty and wire her the $250,000 today. We are family. You protect the brand. Linda's voice did not waver. There was no maternal concern for my well-being, no inquiry about how the online harassment might be affecting my career. Her only priority was the preservation of Ruby's pristine image. You protect the brand. Those 4 words summarized my entire existence in their eyes. Linda and Thomas genuinely believed the digital mirage Ruby had constructed over the years. They thought she was a legitimate billionaire experiencing a minor cash flow hiccup. They viewed my refusal as an act of petty jealousy. In their minds, I was a wealthy casino owner's ungrateful sibling, hoarding my modest corporate salary out of pure spite. They could not fathom that a 25-year-old internet celebrity might not actually own the multi-million-dollar property she constantly tagged in her posts. They bought the illusion, just like the 3 million strangers on the internet did. I do not process emotions the way my family does. Where they see drama, I see metrics. Where they see a crisis, I see a broken equation waiting to be balanced. I sat at my kitchen island and stared at the number written on my notepad, 250,000. The figure bothered me on a fundamental level. It was too round, too exact, and entirely disconnected from corporate hospitality reality. If a luxury resort is launching a new VIP lounge, the budget involves complex tiered financing. It requires contractor escrows, interior design retainers, and staggered vendor payouts spread across multiple financial quarters. The costs do not materialize overnight as a desperate demand for $250,000 in untraceable cash. Furthermore, if Ruby were a legitimate equity stakeholder with access to the operating capital, she would never need to beg a data analyst's sister to liquidate a 401k. She would simply instruct her accounting department to draw from the corporate credit line. Cash is a traceable liability in legitimate corporate frameworks. A real business cuts checks. A real business uses wire transfers tied to specific invoices. Asking for a lump sum of personal cash is the hallmark of unregulated debt. The story she fed our parents was a poorly constructed narrative designed to mask a terrifying truth. Ruby did not need funding for a renovation. She needed a bailout. In the Nevada desert, when someone demands that much cash with zero notice, bloodshot eyes, and shaking hands, they are not building a lounge. They are trying to stop a hemorrhage. They owe the wrong people, and the grace period has expired. The digital mob outside my virtual door was still howling. The view count on her tearful video crossed the 1 million mark. The comments were a stream of vitriol. She thought the public pressure would break my resolve. She thought I would transfer the funds just to stop the barrage of hate messages flooding my inbox and threatening my professional reputation. It was a classic extortion tactic, updated for the modern era of public shaming. But extortion only works if the target has something left to lose. Ruby had spent her entire life convincing our parents that I was nothing. She had just broadcast to the world that I was dead to her. She severed the only social tether that could have held me back from defending myself. By declaring me the villain in her fabricated tragedy, she gave me permission to stop playing the compliant, silent daughter. I closed out of the social media tabs. The noise of the internet faded into the background, replaced by the quiet hum of my processor. I opened a clean, encrypted terminal window on my screen. I routed my connection through a secure virtual private network. If my sister wanted to use her public platform to destroy my life over a fabricated loan refusal, I needed to know exactly what she was hiding behind that platform. I needed to see the real architecture of her supposed empire before the people she owed money to came looking for answers. And to understand what I was looking for, I had to review the exact sequence of events from 3 nights ago, the moment she stood in my living room and showed me her true face. 72 hours before my sister declared me dead to 3 million people, she stood in my living room and begged me to save her life. It was Saturday night. A rare desert rain was washing the dust off the Henderson streets outside my window. The intercom buzzed at 9:45. I did not expect visitors. I pressed the security monitor and saw Ruby pacing the concrete vestibule. She had not stepped foot in my home in 3 years. She preferred locations where she could control the lighting and the guest list. My quiet, unpretentious condo offered neither. I unlocked the front door. She pushed past me before I could offer a greeting. The physical contrast between her online persona and the reality standing in my hallway was stark. She smelled of expensive perfume layered over stale anxiety. She wore oversized designer sunglasses despite the late hour. Her breathing was shallow and erratic. The curated, untouchable mogul she played on the internet had vanished. In her place was a terrified 25-year-old woman vibrating with nervous energy. My training as a digital forensic specialist extends beyond code and server logs. I am conditioned to spot anomalies in human behavior. I analyze deviations from the established baseline. Ruby was a walking collection of distress signals. I noticed the tremor in her hands right away. Her fingers shook as she clutched her handbag. That bag was the second anomaly. It was a recognizable luxury brand, but it was from a spring collection released 2 years prior. In her specific universe of high-end influencers, carrying an outdated accessory is the equivalent of flying commercial. It is a silent admission of dwindling resources. A woman who supposedly owns a luxury resort does not carry vintage out of necessity. She began speaking before I even offered her a seat. The words poured out of her in a rapid, disjointed stream. She paced across my hardwood floor, refusing to make eye contact. She claimed she was dealing with a temporary liquidity bottleneck. She strung together corporate buzzwords that did not belong in the same sentence. She mentioned escrow delays, supply chain disruptions, and vendor contract negotiations for a new VIP lounge at the Aura Casino. The narrative was chaotic. She said she needed short-term capital to bridge a critical gap. She asked me for $250,000 in cash. She promised to repay the sum with 20% interest by the end of the month. She framed it as a high-yield investment opportunity for my stagnant savings. I stood by the kitchen island and let her finish the pitch. I did not interrupt. I listened to the fractured logic of her story. I audit corporate logistics for a living. The math she presented was insulting. Legitimate casino expansions are underwritten by institutional lenders and corporate bonds. They are not financed by raiding a sibling's retirement account on a Saturday night. If she actually held genuine operating equity in a property like Aura, she could secure a commercial portfolio loan in a matter of hours. A true billionaire does not beg for $250,000 in untraceable funds. I looked at her trembling hands. I told her the truth. I kept my voice level and devoid of judgment. I stated that her explanation lacked logistical cohesion. I informed her that my savings were locked in diversified index funds and a standard 401k. I delivered the final verdict. I told her I would not liquidate my financial future to cover an undocumented, unsecured liability. The rejection fractured her fragile composure. She tore the sunglasses off her face. Her eyes were bloodshot and ringed with smeared mascara. The desperate pleading evaporated, instantly replaced by fierce, defensive hostility. This is the ingrained dynamic of our shared history. When she is denied what she wants, she pivots to cruelty. She accused me of hoarding my salary out of pure spite. She raised her voice, claiming I was a bitter, boring spectator watching her build a magnificent empire. She called me a jealous underachiever who wanted to see her fail. The insults were practiced and sharp. She wanted to provoke an emotional reaction. She wanted a screaming match to justify her anger. I did not give her one. I remained silent. Frustrated by my lack of response, Ruby slammed her smartphone face down on my granite kitchen counter. The device hit the stone with a sharp crack. It rested mere inches from my open workstation. While she continued to shout about my supposed resentment, I shifted my focus to my laptop screen. My local network monitor was running a routine background diagnostic. When her phone hit the counter, it automatically pinged my local router. The device was searching for a familiar wireless connection from her last visit years ago. I did not look up at her angry face. I kept my hands resting casually on my keyboard. I executed a silent, rapid command using keyboard shortcuts. I copied her device media access control address. I also captured the unique Bluetooth hardware identifier. It was a specific string of 12 alphanumeric characters. I pasted that string into a secure encrypted text file on my hard drive. It was a simple reflex. It was a habit born from years of tracking hidden digital assets. I collect identifying data markers the way other people collect loose change. At the time, it felt like a minor precaution. I had no idea that those 12 characters would become the ultimate key to dismantling her entire life. Ruby grabbed her phone off the counter. She pointed a shaking, manicured finger at my chest. She delivered a final warning. She promised that my refusal would have severe consequences. She declared that I would regret turning my back on family when she needed me the most. She turned on her heel and stormed out of the condo. The heavy door shut behind her with a definitive thud. I stood in the quiet room listening to the rain. I assumed the consequence she threatened would be another long period of silence. I expected a few months of ignored text messages and skipped holiday dinners. I severely underestimated the depth of her desperation. I did not realize she would trade a private financial rejection for a public execution. I did not foresee her using her massive platform to launch a coordinated attack against my character. Which brings us back to the present moment. I sat in my kitchen on Tuesday morning drinking black coffee while the internet demanded my head. The digital war was raging outside my windows. Her followers were sharpening their virtual pitchforks, convinced they were defending a wronged mogul. But the internet did not know the truth. They did not know about the outdated handbag, the shaking hands, or the illogical plea for cash. And most importantly, Ruby did not know that when she slammed her phone onto my counter, she handed me the exact digital footprint I needed to bypass her security protocols. She handed me the weapon. Now I just needed to figure out what terrifying secret had driven her to my door in the first place. The internet moves through distinct phases of outrage. It begins with performative sympathy for the supposed victim. Then it transitions into a unified hostility toward the designated villain. By 10 o'clock Tuesday morning, the digital mob had bypassed my personal profiles and located my professional footprint. The conflict mutated from a fabricated family drama into a targeted strike on my livelihood. My secondary monitor refreshed to reveal a coordinated assault on my professional networking page. Strangers who lived thousands of miles away were suddenly leaving one-star reviews on my profile. They tagged the data analytics firm where I am employed as a senior investigator. They drafted lengthy paragraphs accusing me of unethical behavior, lacking basic human empathy, and harboring a toxic personality. They demanded my immediate termination. They insisted that a company dealing with sensitive corporate security could not trust a woman who betrayed her own blood. For my sister, the internet is a stage. For me, it is a workspace. I spent 7 years building a pristine professional reputation. I constructed a career based on discretion logic and flawless execution. My corporate sanctuary was the one place my family could not reach. It was the only environment where my competence was valued over optical charm. Seeing that carefully guarded sanctuary invaded by a swarm of anonymous accounts felt like watching a slow-motion home invasion. I monitored the influx of false reports with detached fascination. A lesser firm might have panicked and suspended me to appease the virtual crowd. Fortunately, the partners at my agency understand the mechanics of digital smear campaigns better than anyone. They recognize synthetic outrage when they see it. Still, the sheer volume of notifications was designed to induce panic. Ruby wanted me to feel the walls closing in. She expected me to break under the pressure of public humiliation and professional ruin. My mobile device vibrated again. The caller identification displayed my father, Thomas James. To comprehend Thomas, you must understand the specific ecosystem of commercial real estate brokers in the Nevada desert. My father is a man who leases luxury vehicles to park outside networking events, hoping the valet leaves them near the entrance. He believes success is a garment you wear until it becomes real. His entire business model relies on projecting an aura of prosperity that his actual balance sheets rarely reflect. For Thomas, image is not a byproduct of success. It is the currency itself. I accepted the call and engaged the recording function on my secondary monitor. I did not offer a greeting. I waited for him to establish the parameters of the conversation. Thomas did not ask how I was coping with the sudden influx of global hatred. He bypassed standard parental concern and launched directly into a reprimand. He used a tone usually reserved for insubordinate junior brokers. His voice was tight with restrained panic. He informed me that my stubbornness was creating a catastrophic public relations crisis. He said I was causing irreparable damage to the family brand. I let the phrase hang in the silence. The family brand. He was referring to a manufactured facade. We were not a dynasty. We were 4 people operating in separate orbits. But Thomas had tied his own fragile professional reputation to Ruby and her perceived ascent. He believed her proximity to casino wealth elevated his own status among local developers. Thomas continued his lecture. He insisted that in our city, perception dictates reality. He claimed my refusal to help my sister was spooking her investors. He demanded I issue a written apology on all platforms. Then he ordered me to visit my bank and secure a personal line of credit, using my condominium as collateral. He wanted me to leverage my only tangible asset to generate the cash Ruby requested. A father was instructing his stable, independent daughter to jeopardize her financial foundation to uphold a mirage. He wanted me to set myself on fire to keep her influencer persona warm. I maintained my silence. My refusal to argue disrupted his rhythm. Silence forces an agitator to fill the void. He began to pace. I could hear his dress shoes clicking against the tile floor of his home office. His frustration boiled over. The polished broker dropped the corporate jargon and reverted to raw desperation. He raised his voice, shouting that I did not comprehend the stakes. He said Ruby was dealing with serious people who do not tolerate delays. He claimed she needed to satisfy her obligations by Friday, or she would lose her equity shares. And then he made the fatal error. Thomas spat out a name he never should have spoken aloud. He yelled that Vanguard Hospitality was losing patience and would not grant any further extensions. The temperature in my kitchen dropped. I stopped typing. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I did not react verbally. I simply ended the call. The line went dead. I immediately exported the audio file, renaming it and saving it to the secure drive I established earlier that morning. Vanguard Hospitality is a ghost entity. It sounds like a legitimate corporate conglomerate. A tourist might assume they manage resort buffets or hotel linen services. But my job involves tracking the money that flows beneath the neon. I have analyzed the routing protocols for dozens of front companies in the state. I know exactly what Vanguard is. They are a shadow lending syndicate operating out of a nondescript office park in Paradise, Nevada. They cater to desperate individuals who cannot secure traditional commercial credit, high rollers who overextend their markers, developers who leverage properties they do not own, influencers who need capital to maintain an illusion. Vanguard offers immediate liquidity with astronomical interest rates and devastating enforcement clauses. Legitimate financial institutions send certified letters when a loan defaults. They file civil lawsuits. They report delinquencies to credit bureaus. Vanguard does not bother with the civil court system. They utilize an alternative collection methodology. They seize physical assets. They acquire controlling shares through coercion. They send representatives who break things until the ledger is balanced. The puzzle pieces click together with terrifying precision. The outdated designer handbag, the erratic breathing, the frantic demand for $250,000 in untraceable funds. The margin call was real. Ruby was not crying on the internet because her feelings were hurt. She was running a diversion. She needed the public to view her as a victim, to distract from her impending ruin. She needed my cash to appease the syndicate. My sister was not merely a superficial internet celebrity dealing with a minor cash flow issue. She was in profound physical danger. She owed a substantial sum to criminals who would not hesitate to dismantle her life. And my father knew about it. He was complicit in the cover-up. He was willing to sacrifice my safety and my future to pay off her illicit debts. The nature of the game had shifted. The stakes were no longer about social media followers or damaged pride. The conflict had transcended petty jealousy. I was standing on the edge of a criminal enterprise. I needed to see the full scope of the disaster. I needed to access Ruby and her hidden digital world. It was time to deploy the hardware identifier I extracted from her smartphone. I was going to rip the curtain away from the Aura Casino and expose the ugly truth hiding in the dark. There is a profound comfort in raw information. People lie. They cry, fabricate, manipulate, and project. Data does not possess an ego. It simply exists, waiting to be organized and understood. When my father severed the connection after uttering the name of a dangerous shadow lending syndicate, I did not experience fear. I felt the familiar cold clarity that accompanies the start of a deep forensic dive. I was no longer dealing with a sibling rivalry. I was mapping a crime scene. I walked to my workstation and woke my primary monitors. The screens illuminated my dark living room, casting a pale blue light across the walls. I opened a sterile virtual machine environment. To understand the exact nature of the threat converging on my family, I needed unrestricted access to the digital kingdom my sister guarded so fiercely. 3 days prior, Ruby had slammed her smartphone onto my kitchen counter. During that brief physical contact, my local network diagnostic tool captured her device media access control address and its unique Bluetooth hardware identifier. A MAC address functions as a permanent digital fingerprint for a piece of hardware. Most security protocols rely on recognizing that fingerprint to authorize access. Using a specialized network emulation software, I instructed my laptop to broadcast those exact stolen identifiers. I was effectively cloning her digital presence. I disguised my computer to look exactly like the device she held in her hands. With the spoofing protocol active, I navigated to the cloud storage portal associated with her primary email address. Ruby is a creature of habit. She utilizes the same password variations she has maintained since high school. A simple dictionary attack, cross-referenced with her pets' names and birth years, yielded the correct sequence within 4 minutes. The two-factor authentication prompt appeared on my screen. Because my machine was successfully mimicking her recognized hardware, the system bypassed the secondary mobile verification text. I was inside. I bypassed her vast folders of unedited photographs and promotional schedules. I sought the administrative core of her constructed life. I located a directory labeled Tax Documents. It was disorganized, chaotic, and filled with unsorted PDF files. I began downloading the contents to my encrypted local drive. My objective was to dissect the Aura Casino. The public narrative presented by entertainment magazines and gossip blogs positioned Ruby as the brilliant young visionary behind the luxury resort. She gave interviews discussing her design choices for the high-limit rooms. She posed on the casino floor, treating the employees like her personal staff. I needed to see the capitalization table. I needed to verify the ownership structure. I extracted the name of the holding company from her recent tax filings. It was registered as Neon Horizon Partners. Armed with that specific corporate entity, I pivoted away from her personal cloud and accessed the Nevada Gaming Control Board public registry. State law mandates transparent disclosure of any individual holding more than a 5% equity stake in a licensed gaming operation. I searched the registry for Neon Horizon Partners. The results populated instantly. The primary license holder and majority shareholder was a man named Victor Cross. He held 98% of the voting shares. I stared at the distribution chart. There was no empire. There was no visionary mogul. Ruby held a microscopic 2% non-voting vanity stake. The reality of her arrangement became painfully clear. Victor Cross was a legitimate, ruthless hospitality magnate. He understood the value of social media marketing in the modern Las Vegas economy. Instead of paying an advertising agency millions of dollars to promote his new property, he targeted a desperate local influencer. He gifted Ruby a negligible fraction of the company. In exchange, she became the unpaid mascot. She posted the photos, generated the hype, and created the illusion of youthful, glamorous ownership. She was not the boss. She was a glorified billboard wearing designer clothes. But a 2% stake in a major strip property still carries a theoretical paper value. It is an illiquid asset, meaning it cannot be easily sold or converted to cash, but it can be leveraged. I returned to the downloaded files from her cloud storage. I cross-referenced her bank statements with the dates of her most lavish social media posts. A terrifying financial mosaic took shape across my monitors. Every private jet flight, every imported sports car, every week-long excursion to a tropical villa was financed by debt. Ruby had utilized her 2% equity as collateral to secure high-interest personal loans from Vanguard Hospitality. She was living the lifestyle of a billionaire by borrowing money from criminals at predatory rates. I located the specific promissory notes buried in a subfolder. Vanguard does not write standard commercial contracts. Their agreements read like extortion letters wrapped in legal formatting. The interest rates were staggering, compounding weekly. The terms included severe penalty clauses for missed payments. I found the origin of the panic. I found the $250,000. It was not a loan for a new VIP lounge. It was a margin call. Ruby had missed 3 consecutive monthly interest payments. According to the contract, Vanguard had triggered an acceleration clause. They demanded $250,000 as a balloon payment to cure the default. The document specified a rigid deadline, Friday. If she failed to deliver the funds by Friday, Vanguard would not simply seize her 2% vanity stake. The contract included a cross-collateralization provision. They would liquidate her personal bank accounts, seize her vehicles, and likely pursue physical intimidation tactics to extract the remaining balance. The syndicate was going to erase her. I sat back in my ergonomic chair and rubbed my eyes. The digital clock on my taskbar displayed 3 in the morning. The digital mob was still active outside my virtual walls, still demanding I apologize to the wealthy sister who was supposedly building an empire. The irony was suffocating. The woman they were defending was a hollow shell standing on a trap door. I possessed the entire truth. I held the exact dimensions of her ruin on my hard drive. But obtaining the truth in a vacuum is useless. Knowledge only provides safety if you know how to wield it. A cold realization began to creep into my peripheral thoughts. I looked closer at the original Vanguard loan origination document. The initial principal amount was $500,000. I know the underwriting standards for shadow lenders. They are predators, but they are not foolish. They do not hand $500,000 in liquid cash to a 20-something internet personality based solely on a minority share in an unproven casino venture. They demand a secondary layer of security. They require a guarantor. They need a signature from someone with a verified salary, pristine credit, and tangible assets. Ruby did not possess those qualifications. Thomas certainly did not possess them. His real estate firm was barely solvent. Linda had not worked a formal job in 2 decades. Someone else had to back that paper. Someone with a spotless financial record. I opened the final page of the PDF document. I scrolled down to the signature line for the secondary collateral guarantor. My heart rate slowed to a steady, deliberate rhythm as I prepared to examine the name printed at the bottom of the contract. The war was about to escalate from a financial disaster into a profound personal betrayal. I stared at the glowing rectangle of my secondary monitor for a long time. My apartment was entirely silent except for the rhythmic hum of the computer cooling fan. The document displayed on the screen was a standard secondary collateral agreement. It is the type of paperwork shadow banking entities require when the primary borrower lacks sufficient tangible assets to cover a catastrophic default. The syndicate needed a safety net. They needed a guarantor with a verifiable salary, a pristine credit history, and real estate equity. I scrolled to the bottom of the digital page. The black ink on the electronic signature line stood out against the white background. I looked at my own name, Stella James. The autograph was a flawless replication. I study data for a living, but I also study patterns. I analyze the curvature of the letters. I examine the slant of the lowercase characters and the sharp angles of the capital letters. Someone had spent hours practicing that specific stroke. This was not a rushed scribble done in a moment of panic. It was a deliberate, calculated forgery. Someone had studied old greeting cards or discarded financial statements to master the exact pressure and flow of my handwriting. I felt a strange physical sensation. It was not anger. It was a profound, chilling detachment. It felt as though the temperature in my chest had dropped 10 degrees. I leaned closer to the monitor. A shadow lender operating out of Paradise, Nevada, does not hand over $500,000 based on a simple signature. They require authentication. They need a state-sanctioned witness to verify that the person signing the document is indeed the individual listed on the government-issued identification. I magnified the lower right corner of the PDF file. Resting adjacent to my forged name was a circular blue stamp. It was a notary public seal. The emblem of the state of Nevada was clearly visible in the center. Encircling the emblem was a commission number and an expiration date. A notary stamp leaves a permanent administrative trail. I opened a new browser tab and navigated to the Nevada Secretary of State official portal. I accessed the public notary database. I typed the commission number from the forged document into the search field. I pressed enter and waited for the query to return a result. The database generated a name and a registered business address. The notary was a woman named Helen. I recognized the name immediately. She had been the loyal office manager at my father's commercial real estate brokerage for over a decade. I had sent her flowers when her dog passed away. I had helped her fix her email server when it crashed during a busy holiday weekend. The pieces of the puzzle locked together with devastating precision. Helen would never risk her state commission and potential federal prison time for a 25-year-old influencer she barely knew. Helen answered to one person. She took orders from Thomas. My father was not a passive bystander in this financial disaster. He was the architect of the fraud. He had ordered his own employee to stamp a forged legal document, effectively binding his eldest daughter to a ruthless criminal syndicate. A new question immediately surfaced. Why would Thomas take such an extraordinary legal risk? A parent might turn a blind eye to a favored child acting irresponsibly. A parent might even co-sign a legitimate bank loan to help that child maintain an illusion of success. But coordinating a felony forgery with a shadow lender requires a survival motive. It requires a level of desperation that mere favoritism cannot explain. I pivoted my investigation away from the Aura Casino and focused my forensic tools on my father's business entity. I accessed the county clerk records and pulled the commercial property filings for his brokerage. I cross-referenced those filings with state tax liens and civil court dockets. The financial history of his company over the past 2 years was a portrait of a slow, agonizing death. The brokerage had lost its 3 largest commercial tenants in a single quarter. The operating accounts were drained. He was facing multiple civil lawsuits for unpaid vendor invoices. According to the public ledger, his firm was mere weeks away from insolvency and a forced Chapter 11 bankruptcy declaration. Then I examined the bank routing data from 11 months ago. That was the exact same month Ruby secured the initial $5 million line of credit from Vanguard. A sudden, miraculous infusion of capital appeared on Thomas's business ledger. A wire transfer of $150,000 was deposited into the brokerage operating account. The origin of the transfer was a shell company routed through the Cayman Islands. I traced the shell company registration. It matched the exact corporate structure Vanguard uses to disperse their illicit loans. Ruby did not just borrow money to buy designer wardrobes and lease luxury sports cars. She took the syndicate funds and bailed out our father. The entire family dynamic was instantly recontextualized. The golden child versus scapegoat narrative I had accepted my entire life was a lie. It was not simply toxic parenting. It was an organized, complicit criminal enterprise. Thomas needed a cash injection to save his failing public image and keep his brokerage afloat. Ruby needed capital to maintain her synthetic billionaire influencer persona. They both needed a victim with a spotless financial record to absorb the risk. They selected the reliable, invisible daughter. They sacrificed my financial identity to construct a barrier between their illusions and reality. They assumed I would remain oblivious. They calculated that even if I eventually discovered the fraud, I would be too conditioned by years of obedience to challenge them. They expected me to silently absorb the destruction rather than dismantle the family. The grief I should have felt was entirely absent. You cannot mourn people who view you as raw material. You can only outmaneuver them. I minimized the browser windows. I created a new folder on the center of my desktop. I encrypted it with a randomized 32-character alphanumeric password. I typed the title, The Ledger. I began moving the accumulated evidence into the secure vault. I dragged the media access control logs demonstrating how I bypassed her security. I transferred the PDF of the forged Vanguard collateral agreement. I saved the screenshot of the notary commission belonging to my father's employee. I added the audio file of Thomas screaming about the syndicate over the phone. I compiled the offshore routing numbers proving Ruby funneled the shadow money to save the family business. I was building an impenetrable fortress of receipts. No corporate lawyer and no internet mob could argue with server timestamps and verified financial transfers. As the progress bar indicated the files were securing, a terrifying logistical reality crashed over me. I looked at the digital calendar on my taskbar. Today was Tuesday. The $250,000 margin call was due on Friday. Shadow lenders operate outside the boundaries of civil litigation. When a legitimate bank experiences a default, they freeze accounts and send letters. When Vanguard experiences a default, they send operatives. They do not care about family dynamics or who actually spent the cash. They only care about the names listed on the contract. Ruby could not pay the margin call. Her desperate appearance at my door proved she had exhausted her resources. Thomas could not pay it. His brokerage was barely surviving on the funds they had already stolen. The syndicate would realize the primary borrower was insolvent. Standard operating procedure dictates they immediately pivot to the secondary guarantor. They would run my name through their databases. They would find my pristine credit score. They would locate the Henderson condominium I owned outright. They would see a lucrative corporate salary. They would determine that I was the only tangible asset left to liquidate. The digital harassment from her 3 million followers was a minor inconvenience. The one-star reviews on my professional profile were irrelevant. The real threat was no longer confined to the internet. Vanguard representatives were going to stop calling Ruby. They were going to start looking for Stella. I had 48 hours before the people who broke legs for a living realized my forged signature was their only path to $250,000. I needed to move faster than the syndicate. I needed to construct a trap that would protect my life and simultaneously redirect the predators back toward the people who invited them into our home. Wednesday morning arrived with the blinding clarity unique to the Nevada desert. The neon lights of the Strip fade under the harsh sun, revealing the cracks in the pavement and the dust settling on the glass facades. I woke up and followed my standard routine. I did not contact my parents. I did not text my sister to demand an explanation. In dysfunctional dynamics, the anticipated response to a betrayal is an explosive confrontation. Toxic people crave the screaming match because it allows them to manipulate the narrative. They can call you hysterical. They can shift the blame. They use your emotional reaction as proof of your instability. I refused to play the assigned role. I requested a personal day from my data analytics firm, citing a family emergency. It was the only lie I told that day. I dressed in professional attire, selecting a tailored blazer and practical shoes. I was not preparing for a fight. I was preparing to execute a masterclass in administrative retaliation. At 9 o'clock, I walked through the glass doors of my primary financial institution. I did not wait in the standard teller line. I requested an immediate meeting with the branch manager. I was escorted into a soundproof office with frosted windows. I sat across from a man named David and instructed him to initiate a comprehensive lockdown of my financial identity. David reviewed my pristine account history and asked if I had misplaced a debit card. I informed him that my credentials had been compromised by a sophisticated local syndicate. I handed him a prepared document listing the exact corporate aliases utilized by Vanguard. I instructed him to freeze my credit across all 3 major reporting bureaus. I filed a preemptive federal fraud alert. I explicitly named Vanguard Hospitality as a hostile entity attempting to leverage a forged collateral agreement. I watched his keystrokes on the monitor. Every time he struck a key, a door locked. A credit freeze is an invisible wall. It ensures no new accounts can be opened and no existing credit lines can be expanded. If the shadow lenders attempted to verify my forged signature by pinging my credit profile, the system would immediately generate a red flag and block the inquiry. The first layer of concrete was poured. My credit profile was now a fortified bunker. By 10:30, I was sitting in the reception area of a prominent defense firm located in downtown Las Vegas. While my father utilized cheap strip mall lawyers to delay his commercial evictions, I sought out a former federal prosecutor who specialized in white-collar financial crimes. His name was Robert. He commanded a retainer of $700 an hour. He ushered me into his office and offered me a seat. I bypassed the standard pleasantries and placed a silver flash drive on his mahogany desk. I told him it was the ledger. I walked him through the offshore routing numbers, the forged secondary collateral agreement, and the compromised notary seal. Robert plugged the drive into his secure terminal. He reviewed the metadata logs I had extracted from Ruby's phone. He read the transcript of my father's frantic phone call. He studied the cross-collateralization clause buried in the Vanguard loan. Robert leaned back in his leather chair and looked at me with professional respect. He noted that most victims of family financial abuse spend months entangled in emotional denial before seeking legal counsel. They waste precious time begging the perpetrators to fix the damage. They bargain with people who view them as collateral. I told Robert I had no interest in fixing my family. I only wanted to isolate them. I paid his retainer in full using a cashier's check. I established an impenetrable legal buffer between myself and the inevitable fallout. If the Shadow Syndicate or my father's desperate attorneys attempted to contact me, they would have to route their communications through a man who sued organized crime rings for sport. Throughout the morning, my phone vibrated constantly in my purse. Ruby was still performing. I glanced at the screen while riding the elevator down from Robert's office. She had posted a new update. It was a photograph of her sipping an expensive green juice on a private terrace, accompanied by a caption about protecting her peace and cutting out toxic negativity. Her follower count was surging. The engagement metrics were breaking her previous records. Her fans were applauding her resilience. She believed she had won. She thought her digital smear campaign had successfully silenced me. She mistook my lack of a public response for surrender. At noon, I arrived at the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. A police precinct is the antithesis of a casino. There are no flattering lights or soft carpets designed to disorient you. It is an environment built on harsh fluorescence and undeniable facts. I approached the intake desk and requested to file a formal felony identity theft report. I was directed to a small interview room where I sat with a seasoned detective. I handed over printed copies of the forged secondary collateral agreement. I provided the specific commission number of the notary public employed by my father. I detailed the timeline of the fraudulent signature and the corresponding wire transfers. I did not frame the narrative as a family dispute or a misunderstanding. I reported a coordinated financial crime perpetrated by individuals operating under extreme duress. The detective stopped writing and looked up when I explained the origin of the notary stamp. The implication was clear. This was not a stranger stealing a credit card out of a mailbox. This was an orchestrated internal breach. Filing a false police report is a crime. By submitting the documents, I was swearing under penalty of perjury that the signature was a forgery. It was the ultimate escalation. I signed the official statement without hesitation. The detective generated an official case number. The paperwork was stamped and filed into the state database. The second layer of concrete hardened. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the administrative amputation of my blood relatives was finalized. I had systematically unwoven my identity from their collapsing house of cards. I left a paper trail so heavily fortified that no lawyer or shadow lender in Nevada could pierce it. I returned to my condominium. The desert heat was radiating off the pavement outside, but I felt remarkably cool. I unlocked my door and stepped into the quiet sanctuary of my living room. I placed the certified copies of the police report, the federal fraud alert, and the attorney retainer agreement into a single manila envelope. I set the envelope on the kitchen island. The trap was now perfectly set. My parents and my sister had gambled their survival on my inherent obedience. They assumed the quiet daughter would remain quiet. They expected me to absorb the debt to protect the family name. They miscalculated the odds. I poured a glass of iced water and sat on my sofa. The digital clock read 2:15. The margin call was due in fewer than 48 hours. The shadow lenders would soon realize Ruby was bankrupt and her casino equity was worthless. They would discover Thomas had no liquid capital left in his failing brokerage. They would turn their attention to the secondary guarantor. They would come to this exact address, expecting to find a terrified victim they could easily extort. I took a sip of my water and waited for the knock on the door. Thursday afternoon brought the theoretical threat into the physical world. For 48 hours, my existence had been confined to server logs, court filings, and administrative blockades. I sat at my kitchen island analyzing the predictable rhythms of my suburban complex. At exactly 3 o'clock, a black sport utility vehicle turned onto my street. It did not park in a designated visitor space. The driver stopped the heavy machine directly in front of my unit, leaving the engine running. The tinted windows obscured the interior, but the vehicle itself was a statement. It was a designed intrusion. Las Vegas operates on a hierarchy of intimidation. The casinos use bright lights and labyrinthine layouts to disorient tourists. Shadow lending syndicates use a different aesthetic to exert control. Two men stepped out of the idling vehicle. They wore suits that cost thousands of dollars, but the tailoring strained across their shoulders and chests. They were hired to project the polished image of corporate hospitality while simultaneously broadcasting the capacity for physical damage. They walked up my concrete path with the unhurried, synchronized stride of predators who know their prey has nowhere to run. They expected the standard routine. When syndicate collectors arrive at a residential address, they anticipate a specific sequence of events. They expect the target to peek through the blinds. They expect a trembling hand securing the deadbolt. They expect tears, frantic apologies, and desperate negotiations. They rely on that fear to establish dominance before a single word is spoken. 3 sharp knocks echoed through my living room. The sound was measured and deliberate. I did not check the security monitor. I already knew who was standing on my welcome mat. I picked up the thick manila envelope resting on the granite counter. I walked to the door and turned the lock. I did not engage the security chain. I opened the door wide, standing squarely in the frame. The immediate absence of a physical barrier disrupted their practiced rhythm. The taller man, standing on the left, blinked. His posture shifted a fraction of an inch as he processed my calm demeanor. He recovered quickly, adopting a smooth, practiced baritone. He introduced himself as a representative of Vanguard Hospitality Partners. He stated they were conducting a field visit regarding a delinquent account. He recited the balance, $250,000. He noted the margin call was due by tomorrow evening. He mentioned my signature on the secondary collateral agreement. I did not invite them inside. I did not lower my gaze. I extended my right hand and offered him the manila envelope. I spoke with the clinical precision of a data analyst delivering a quarterly risk assessment. I informed him that the signature on his collateral document was a confirmed forgery. I instructed him to review the first 3 pages inside the envelope. The man opened the clasp and extracted the documents. He stood on my porch under the harsh Nevada sun, reading the official police report for felony identity theft. He saw the federal fraud injunctions and the credit bureau lock confirmations. He examined the formal retainer agreement from a high-profile white-collar defense attorney. I narrated his reading process. I explained that the notary stamp utilized on their contract belonged to a commercial real estate employee working under my father. I clarified that pursuing me for the fraudulent debt would trigger a federal investigation into their lending practices, because my attorney had already flagged Vanguard as a hostile entity in the federal database. Criminal syndicates are businesses. They operate on risk matrices and return on investment calculations. They do not let pride dictate their collection strategies. The man reading the police report understood the implications immediately. Pursuing me or attempting to foreclose on my condominium would yield a negligible financial return, while inviting the scrutiny of federal regulators and defense lawyers. I was no longer a profitable target. I was a legal liability. His jaw tightened. He slid the legal documents to the back of the stack. He looked at me with cold calculation, preparing to issue a standard parting threat before retreating. I did not give him the opportunity to speak. I raised my hand and directed his attention to the remaining pages in the envelope. Defense is a temporary measure. A shield only works until the attacker finds a new angle. To neutralize a threat permanently, you must redirect its momentum. I told the Vanguard representative that I was not just handing him an identity theft report. I was handing him the solution to his margin call. I instructed him to examine the spreadsheets printed on the final 5 pages. I explained that Ruby did not lose their $500,000 on bad investments or casino renovations. I told him she defrauded them. I guided his eyes to the offshore routing numbers I had extracted from her encrypted cloud storage. I broke down the financial architecture of her hidden assets. I pointed out the dividend accounts tied to her 2% vanity equity at the Aura Casino. I showed him the specific shell company where she had parked a portion of her promotional earnings. I detailed the wire transfer she had routed to my father to save his failing brokerage. The two men scrutinized the spreadsheets. As syndicate enforcers, they were trained to recognize legitimate banking codes and offshore routing prefixes. They saw the server timestamps. They saw the transaction histories. They realized they were looking at a roadmap to the exact funds they were sent to collect. I delivered the final piece of the puzzle. I informed them that my sister and my father possessed the liquid capital to clear the margin call today. They were simply hiding the money behind corporate veils while offering up my forged signature as a sacrificial decoy. Vanguard had been played. The influencer they financed had treated their syndicate with the same casual disrespect she showed her own family. The shift in their demeanor was immediate and profound. The subtle undercurrent of intimidation vanished, replaced by a chilling, focused, predatory silence. The taller man tapped the manila envelope against his palm. He did not ask any follow-up questions. He did not demand further proof. The data spoke for itself. He gave me a single, cold nod, acknowledging the transaction. They turned around and walked back down the concrete path. Their synchronized stride was faster now, driven by a new, localized target. They climbed into the black sport utility vehicle. The tires chirped against the asphalt as the driver accelerated out of my suburban complex, heading back toward the glittering skyline of the Strip. I stood in the doorway and watched them disappear around the corner. I had successfully redirected the sharks. Vanguard was no longer hunting the scapegoat. They were returning to the bleeding prey. But a new logistical problem emerged. The shadow lenders were moving fast. If they confronted my father and my sister too early, the family might panic and attempt a desperate legal maneuver before my federal injunctions fully cleared the banking systems. I needed to stall them. I needed to construct a temporary illusion of compliance to keep my relatives complacent while the syndicate tightened the noose. It was time to pick up my phone and play the role they expected me to play. The black sport utility vehicle disappeared around the corner of my suburban complex. I closed my front door and engaged the deadbolt. The quiet sanctuary of my living room returned, but the underlying equation of the conflict had shifted. In cinematic narratives, justice operates with instantaneous precision. The hero reveals the truth, and the villains are immediately apprehended. In the practical reality of data analysis and forensic accounting, justice is an administrative procedure. It is bound by processing cycles, judicial oversight, and bureaucratic lag. I had successfully filed the federal fraud injunctions. I had submitted the identity theft reports. My personal credit profile was secured within a digital fortress. However, locking down external corporate entities requires a different timeline. Obtaining a federal warrant to freeze a commercial real estate operating account takes time. I calculated the necessary processing window based on standard financial regulatory protocols. I needed exactly 48 hours for the authorities to locate and secure my father's business accounts and Ruby's offshore dividends. This processing delay created a distinct vulnerability. The Vanguard operatives were currently navigating the interstate highway, driving back toward the neon skyline of the Strip. They were irritated, and they were holding the routing numbers to my family's hidden capital. My father is a man who survives by anticipating his own ruin. Throughout his long, turbulent career in commercial real estate, Thomas employed a specific defense mechanism whenever a deal collapsed or a contractor filed a lawsuit. He would rapidly liquidate his local assets and wire the funds into untraceable offshore holding companies before the courts could issue a garnishment order. He was a slippery operator who treated bankruptcy as a strategic maneuver rather than a moral failure. If the shadow lenders confronted him this afternoon and he realized my forged signature was no longer a viable safety net, his survival instinct would override his arrogance. He would panic. He would initiate emergency wire transfers to move the stolen money out of the reach of both the syndicate and the federal investigators. He would abandon Ruby to face the consequences while securing his own financial escape hatch. I could not let him run. I needed him to stay exactly where he was, paralyzed by a false sense of security. To ensure his assets remained stationary, I needed to feed his ego. I needed to construct a temporary illusion of compliance. I placed my smartphone on the kitchen island and poured a glass of cold water. Playing the role of the defeated, compliant scapegoat required meticulous preparation. For 29 years, my family conditioned me to absorb their anxiety. When they applied pressure, they anticipated a brief period of resistance, followed by total submission. I had to mimic that exact behavioral pattern to make the deception credible. I cleared my throat and practiced modifying my vocal cadence. I raised the pitch of my voice to simulate genuine distress. I made my breathing shallow and erratic, replicating the physical symptoms of a person who has just realized they are trapped by forces they cannot control. The digital mob was still active online. My secondary monitor displayed a continuous stream of hostile notifications from Ruby's followers. They were cheering for the wealthy influencer, entirely unaware of the tactical maneuver about to take place offline. I picked up my phone, located my father's contact profile, and initiated the call. He answered on the fourth ring. His greeting was curt, laced with preemptive irritation. He expected another logical argument. He braced himself for a debate about financial boundaries. I did not argue. I let out a carefully calibrated, trembling breath. I spoke softly, letting my words stumble over each other in a performance of manufactured panic. I told him 2 men in dark suits had just visited my condominium. I described the black vehicle, the ill-fitting clothes, and the underlying threat of physical intimidation. I told him they mentioned the margin call and the secondary collateral agreement. I made my voice crack on the final syllable. I told him I was terrified of what they might do. The shift in his demeanor transmitted clearly through the cellular connection. The defensive irritation vanished instantly. It was replaced by a sickening paternal smugness. He believed the shadow lenders had accomplished what his lectures could not. He assumed the syndicate had terrified me into total submission. Thomas thrives in moments where he perceives himself as the dominant force in a negotiation. He lowered his voice, adopting the soothing, condescending tone he uses to close a difficult commercial lease. He told me to calm down. He assured me that Vanguard was a professional organization, provided their ledgers were balanced. He said this was simply how high-level business operated in the Nevada desert. I leaned over the kitchen island, tracing the grain of the granite countertop with my index finger. I played the next card in the sequence. I told him I did not want any trouble. I let out a pathetic whimper, a sound that tasted like ash in my mouth, but served its purpose flawlessly. I said I was willing to help Ruby. I stated I would cover the margin call. I told him I was looking at my retirement portfolio dashboard right now, preparing to initiate the transfer. Thomas let out an audible exhalation of victory. He praised my decision, framing my capitulation as a moral triumph. He launched into a lengthy lecture about family loyalty. He recited his familiar talking points, claiming that blood obligations supersede personal financial comfort. He spun a new fantasy, insisting that Ruby was on the verge of securing a lucrative international endorsement deal. He categorized my extortion payment as an investment in the family legacy. He promised I would be repaid with generous interest once her new VIP lounge opened. It was a staggering display of cognitive dissonance. He was attempting to con me while actively utilizing my forged signature to save his own failing brokerage firm. I let him finish his monologue. I fed his ego with quiet, submissive murmurs of agreement. Then I delivered the hook. I explained that liquidating a diversified 401k is not an instantaneous transaction. Selling mutual funds and processing a hardship withdrawal requires administrative oversight. I told him the brokerage firm mandated a waiting period for cash disbursement. I said I needed exactly 48 hours to wire the funds to his account. I begged him to call his contacts at Vanguard. I pleaded with him to guarantee the syndicate that the money was coming, asking him to secure a 2-day extension on the margin call. The dramatic irony of the conversation reached its peak. Thomas confidently agreed to handle the syndicate. He promised to make the phone call and smooth things over with the collectors. He believed he was manipulating a terrified daughter into financing his survival. He thought he was buying time for Ruby to maintain her neon illusion. He had no idea he was actively constructing his own cage. By contacting Vanguard to confirm my fake payment, he would confirm his own complicity in the debt. He would pacify the shadow lenders, keeping the stolen capital sitting in his vulnerable bank accounts. He was tying himself to the tracks, convinced he was driving the train. We ended the call. His final words were an instruction to keep him updated on the bank transfer. I lowered the phone. The artificial trembling in my hand ceased immediately. The manufactured panic evaporated, leaving the cold, calculating baseline of my true nature. I had successfully deployed the red herring. The predators were pacified, and the prey was complacent. The federal machinery was quietly churning in the background. My screensaver deactivated, revealing the encrypted folder containing the digital evidence of their impending destruction. The countdown had officially commenced. In exactly 48 hours, the illusion of the wealthy influencer and the successful real estate broker would collide with the unforgiving reality of a federal freeze. The only remaining variable was how they would react when the clock struck zero. The money failed to materialize, and the syndicate realized they had been played. They would inevitably come back to the only person they thought they could control. They would come to my doorstep. The 48-hour window expired on Saturday morning. The passage of time is a relentless mechanism. You cannot bribe a clock, and you cannot manipulate a calendar. For 2 days, I monitored the silent execution of my administrative trap. The federal machinery moved with bureaucratic precision. My attorney had leveraged his contacts within the Financial Crimes Division to expedite the injunctions. State regulators issued a freeze order on my father's commercial real estate operating accounts pending a formal audit of the fraudulent notary stamp. Simultaneously, the major banking institutions locked Ruby's offshore dividend channels flagged by the federal identity theft report I filed at the precinct. The financial arteries of my family were clamped shut. Their liquidity dropped to absolute zero. While the government secured the digital ledgers, the shadow lenders conducted their own aggressive operations. The Vanguard operatives did not patiently wait for my fabricated retirement withdrawal to clear. They utilized the routing numbers I provided to locate my father and my sister. When the syndicate attempted to extract the stolen capital, they collided directly with the federal freeze. The accounts were paralyzed. The money was visible, but entirely inaccessible. The shadow lenders realized Thomas could not pay them. They realized Ruby was a hollow asset. The Vegas illusion shattered under the dual pressure of federal oversight and criminal extortion. I stood by my kitchen window and watched a plain silver sedan pull into my suburban complex. It was not a luxury leased vehicle. It was the practical, compact car my mother utilized for grocery shopping. The engine sputtered slightly before the driver shifted into park. 3 figures emerged from the vehicle. The contrast between their historical projection and their current reality was staggering. They looked like ordinary, terrified people who had reached the end of a very long con. They possessed none of the curated glamour they usually wielded like armor. My father walked with a stoop, his shoulders bowed under the weight of impending bankruptcy and syndicate threats. He wore a wrinkled button-down shirt lacking his signature tailored blazer. My mother trailed behind him, clutching her purse against her chest. Her hair was unstyled. Ruby was the most jarring sight. The self-proclaimed queen of the strip looked small and fragile. She wore generic sweatpants and an oversized hooded sweatshirt. The designer sunglasses were gone. Her face was devoid of makeup, revealing dark circles and blotchy skin. The internet celebrity who confidently declared me dead to 3 million people was physically trembling as she approached my concrete walkway. They did not knock with authority. The sound vibrating through my front door was frantic and desperate. It was a rapid succession of panicked strikes against the wood. I walked to the entryway. I did not unlock the deadbolt immediately. I stood in the quiet hallway and listened to their voices filtering through the barrier. My mother spoke first. Her tone was a calculated mixture of maternal concern and frantic urgency. She called my name, pressing her face close to the door. She pleaded with me to open up. She deployed her favorite manipulative phrase, claiming that family sticks together during a crisis. Linda always possessed a remarkable talent for rewriting history in real time. She was the woman who left a scorching voicemail demanding I wire $250,000 to protect a fabricated brand. She was the enabler who encouraged my sister to view me as a disposable resource. Now facing the total collapse of her social standing, she attempted to invoke a familial bond she had spent 3 decades destroying. I reached forward and turned the deadbolt. I grasped the metal handle and pulled the door inward exactly 3 inches. The heavy steel security chain drew taut, stopping the door from opening any further. I looked at my family through the narrow vertical gap. The desert sunlight illuminated the raw fear on their faces. They crowded around the threshold, trying to peer into my calm sanctuary. The smell of stale coffee and profound anxiety wafted through the opening. Thomas attempted to project a remnant of his authoritative broker persona. He placed his hand flat against the exterior of the door and pushed, attempting to widen the gap. The steel chain held firm. He ordered me to unhook the latch. He stated we needed to sit down in the living room and construct a unified strategy to handle the aggressive men who had visited his office. I looked at his hand pressing against the wood. I did not move. I did not speak. My silence forced the reality of the situation to settle over them. They were locked out. They had no leverage and no authority in this space. Ruby pushed past our parents and shoved her face near the opening. The sight of her shattered my remaining expectations of human decency. She was sobbing uncontrollably. The tears were genuine, born from pure self-preservation. She clutched the edge of the doorframe with shaking fingers. Her voice cracked as she unloaded her confession. She admitted that the bank accounts were frozen. She confessed that the Vanguard representatives had confiscated the keys to her leased sports car and threatened to seize the real estate brokerage. The syndicate had drained whatever loose cash they possessed and promised to return on Monday for the remaining balance. She laid out the architecture of their total ruin in rapid, breathless sentences. Then she delivered the demand that defied all logical parameters of morality. Ruby stopped crying for a fraction of a second. She locked her bloodshot eyes onto mine. She begged me to contact the Las Vegas police precinct and withdraw the felony identity theft report. She admitted she knew about the federal fraud injunctions. She stated that her attorney advised her she was facing multiple counts of wire fraud and federal prison time because I had successfully documented the forged signature. She asked me to call the detective and claim I had simply forgotten I signed the secondary collateral agreement. She wanted me to lie to a federal investigator. She wanted me to legally accept $250,000 in syndicate debt. She was explicitly asking me to take the fall for her felony to preserve her freedom and her public facade. The audacity was breathtaking. The golden child stood on my welcome mat, demanding that the scapegoat willingly walk into a prison cell so she could continue pretending to be a billionaire on the internet. Our parents stood directly behind her, offering silent approval of this horrific proposition. They were entirely willing to sacrifice my liberty to save their preferred daughter. In a traditional family drama, this is the moment the protagonist breaks down. The victim screams about the injustice. They list every historical grievance and demand an apology. They seek emotional closure from people fundamentally incapable of providing it. I required no closure. Data does not demand an apology to remain accurate. I looked at my sister through the 3-inch gap. I absorbed the sight of her trembling hands and her tear-stained cheeks. I processed the sheer magnitude of her selfishness. I did not raise my voice. I did not adopt a tone of righteous indignation. I spoke with the clinical, flat delivery of a forensic analyst concluding a comprehensive audit. I asked her a single question. Why would I save the people who pronounced me dead? The words struck the small group like a physical blow. The silence that followed was absolute. Ruby opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. The tears stalled on her cheeks. Thomas dropped his hand from the exterior of the door. Linda took a slow, staggered step backward. The reality of their digital execution had finally rebounded. Ruby had weaponized her audience to declare, I was no longer part of her family. I was merely holding her to the terms of her own public contract. The silence lingering on my front porch was heavy and absolute. For decades, my family utilized noise as a weapon. They relied on shouting matches, dramatic tears, and performative outrage to bulldoze their way through any resistance. When confronted with a quiet, immovable boundary, their entire operational strategy disintegrated. I stood behind the steel security chain and observed the exact moment their psychological framework collapsed. Ruby stopped crying. Her mouth hung open slightly as she processed my question. The manufactured victimhood drained from her features, leaving behind the stark, hollow reality of a cornered animal. She possessed no counterargument. She had broadcast her disdain for me to a global audience, and now she expected me to perish on her behalf. My mother stared at me as if recognizing a stranger. Linda spent her life curating a specific narrative where she was the benevolent matriarch managing a difficult, ungrateful eldest daughter. She expected me to eventually bow my head and seek her approval. Seeing me stand in the entryway entirely unaffected by their collective distress short-circuited her programming. She reached out and grabbed my father's forearm, her fingers digging into the wrinkled fabric of his shirt. Thomas tried to compute the failure of his intimidation tactics. He was a broker accustomed to bullying junior partners and squeezing concessions out of desperate clients. He operated on the assumption that everyone had a breaking point. He believed he simply needed to apply enough pressure until my resolve fractured. He looked at the 3-inch gap between the door and the frame. He realized no amount of pressure would alter the structural integrity of the barrier I had constructed. I did not let the silence stretch into an invitation for further debate. I reached into the pocket of my tailored blazer, my fingers wrapped around a solid aluminum object. It was a high-capacity encrypted flash drive. I purchased this specific hardware model for cold storage archiving. It was designed to withstand physical damage and secure sensitive data behind military-grade encryption algorithms. The metallic casing felt cool against my palm. I extended my arm toward the narrow opening. I held the device between my thumb and index finger, suspending it in the empty space separating my quiet sanctuary from their chaotic disaster. I released my grip. The heavy aluminum drive dropped through the gap. It hit the concrete welcome mat with a sharp, distinctive clatter. The three of them flinched at the sound. They looked down at the small silver rectangle resting near the toes of Thomas's scuffed leather shoes. They did not understand the significance of the object yet. They still operated under the delusion that this was a standard family argument that could be resolved through negotiation or emotional blackmail. They needed to understand the precise dimensions of the trap they had walked into. I kept my voice flat and devoid of theatrical inflection. I directed my gaze toward my father. I informed him that the device resting on the concrete was a complete duplicate of my primary archive. I told him I titled the directory The Ledger. I proceeded to narrate the contents of the storage medium. I spoke slowly, ensuring every syllable registered in his panicked mind. I explained that the first folder contained the media access control logs and the specific Bluetooth hardware identifier extracted from Ruby's smartphone when she slammed it onto my kitchen counter. I clarified that those digital footprints proved exactly how I bypassed her security protocols to access her cloud storage. Ruby gasped, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. She finally realized her own temper tantrum had provided the key to her destruction. I continued the verbal inventory. I told Thomas the second folder contained the pristine, unedited, portable document format file of the Vanguard Secondary Collateral Agreement. I highlighted the presence of the forged signature. I mentioned the meticulous timestamp records associated with the document creation. Then I delivered the critical detail. I stated that the folder also contained a high-resolution capture of the notary public seal belonging to Helen, his loyal office manager. The remaining color vanished from my father's face. The skin around his jawline turned a pale, sickly gray. The implication struck him with the force of a physical collision. I was not merely accusing Ruby of borrowing money irresponsibly. I was presenting undeniable documentary evidence of a coordinated corporate felony. I did not offer him a moment to recover. I listed the third item on the drive. I described the financial spreadsheets outlining the offshore routing prefixes. I recited the specific alphanumeric codes associated with the Cayman Island shell company Vanguard utilized for disbursements. I mapped the exact trajectory of the $150,000 wire transfer that moved from the Shadow Syndicate through Ruby's holding company and directly into his commercial real estate operating account. I proved he knowingly accepted stolen funds to save his failing brokerage. I saved the most devastating piece of evidence for the conclusion. I told him the final file was an audio recording. I specified the date and duration of our previous telephone conversation. I reminded him of the precise moment he angrily dropped the name Vanguard Hospitality while demanding I secure a personal loan. I explained that the recording captured him openly acknowledging the criminal syndicate and confirming his active participation in the extortion attempt. Thomas swayed slightly, his balance faltering. He looked down at the silver flash drive with an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. The object on the mat was no longer a piece of technology. It was a localized explosive device containing the sum total of his financial and legal ruin. He opened his mouth to speak, but his throat was dry. He swallowed hard, attempting to summon his authoritative broker persona. He failed. When he finally managed to vocalize a response, his voice was a raspy whisper. He asked what I intended to do with the information. He asked if this was a negotiation tactic to secure a larger share of the casino equity. He still viewed the world through the lens of leverage and profit. I corrected his fundamental misunderstanding of the situation. I informed him that the drive on the mat was merely a courtesy copy provided for his legal defense team. I articulated my next sentence with surgical precision. I stated that the original files were already securely lodged with the Federal Bureau of Investigation Cybercrimes Division. My mother let out a sharp, strangled cry. I added a secondary destination. I noted that duplicate physical dossiers had been delivered to the Enforcement Division of the Nevada Gaming Control Board. In Las Vegas, involving the Gaming Control Board is the equivalent of a death sentence for any hospitality enterprise. The board possesses the unilateral authority to revoke gaming licenses, freeze operational assets, and blacklist individuals from participating in the state economy forever. By submitting the forgery and embezzlement evidence to the state regulators, I guaranteed that Ruby's 2% vanity equity would be seized and liquidated. I guaranteed that Victor Cross, the legitimate majority owner of the Aura Resort, would face a mandatory compliance audit. The true casino magnate would immediately realize his influencer mascot had brought federal scrutiny to his doorstep. He would crush her. The architecture of their inescapable concrete tomb was fully revealed. There was no negotiation remaining. There was no apology that could reverse the trajectory of the federal investigations. Stella did not just refuse to fold her hand. She flipped the entire table and burned the casino to the ground. Thomas realized his career, his freedom, and his reputation were entirely extinguished. The desperation mutated into a final, pathetic surge of anger. He stepped closer to the 3-inch gap, pointing a shaking finger toward my face. He attempted to deliver a hollow threat. He sneered that I was making a catastrophic mistake. He declared that I was crossing an unforgivable line and destroying our family. He promised I would spend the rest of my life regretting this betrayal. He wanted the last word. He wanted to project a fleeting illusion of power before the darkness swallowed him. I looked at his shaking finger. I looked at my mother weeping on the sidewalk. I looked at the golden child staring blankly at the desert landscaping her synthetic empire reduced to digital ash. I cut him off mid-sentence. My delivery was ice cold, leaving no room for interpretation or debate. You destroyed the family. I just kept the receipts. I stepped back from the threshold. I grabbed the heavy wooden edge of the door and pushed it forward. The steel security chain rattled as the gap closed. The door met the frame with a solid, definitive thud. I reached up and turned the deadbolt, locking the mechanism into place. The satisfying metallic click echoed through the quiet hallway, finalizing the administrative and emotional severing of my past. They were left standing on the concrete mat, holding the instrument of their own demise, while the Nevada sun beat down on their shattered illusions. The trap had snapped shut, but the public spectacle was far from over. Ruby still had a live broadcast scheduled for Friday evening. The syndicate was closing in, and the entire internet was waiting for a show. Friday evening descended over the Nevada desert, bringing a temporary reprieve from the blinding heat. The shadows stretched across the suburban streets of Henderson, settling into the familiar twilight quiet. Inside my condominium, the atmosphere was a study in stillness. I sat on my living room sofa with my legs crossed, resting a cold glass of iced water against my knee. The primary source of illumination was the cool spectral glow of my laptop screen. I was not typing. My fingers were interlaced, resting in my lap. The forensic extraction was finished. The administrative blockades were active. The bureaucratic snare I spent the week weaving was now a self-sustaining mechanism. I occupied the unique position of an architect admiring a completed structure moments before it is tested by a hurricane. The screen displayed a high-definition live broadcast. My sister was the focal point. She stood inside a velvet-roped enclosure at the center of the Aura Resort. The contrast between her current physical location and her appearance on my welcome mat just hours earlier was a testament to the sheer power of human delusion. In behavioral data analysis, there is a recognized concept known as the extinction burst. When an individual relies on a specific manipulated behavior to achieve a desired result, and that tactic suddenly fails, they do not immediately abandon the strategy. Instead, they double down. They escalate the behavior to extreme levels, hoping a massive surge of the old method will somehow shatter the new resistance. Ruby was exhibiting a textbook extinction burst. Her financial reality was a smoking crater. The Shadow Syndicate was actively hunting her. The federal authorities were freezing her secret accounts. She knew I had delivered the undeniable evidence of her felony forgery to the state gaming regulators. Yet, instead of consulting a defense attorney or fleeing the jurisdiction, she decided to host a highly publicized VIP celebration. She believed that if she projected an image of flawless, untouchable wealth, the universe would be forced to bend to her illusion. She wore a shimmering designer gown that caught the ambient light of the casino floor. A professional styling team had erased the dark circles and the tear stains I saw earlier that afternoon. She held a crystal flute of imported champagne, smiling for the cameras operated by her entourage. To the untrained eye, she looked like a triumphant mogul. To a forensic specialist, the physical tells of profound panic were glaring. Her grip on the delicate stem of the glass was rigid, turning her knuckles a pale white. Her smile did not engage the muscles around her eyes. Her gaze darted constantly toward the entrance of the high-limit lounge, scanning the perimeter for threats she knew were coming. The chat window on the right side of my screen scrolled at a blinding speed. Her 3 million followers received the notification that the Queen of the Strip was broadcasting live. The concurrent viewer metric climbed rapidly, surpassing 200,000 individual watchers within the first 10 minutes. Pinned securely to the top of the interface was the original video she posted on Tuesday. The defamatory clip declaring me dead to the family remained active. She left the smear campaign visible as a foundational piece of her ongoing narrative. She needed her audience to view this lavish party as a victory celebration over a toxic, jealous sibling. The incoming comments were a relentless stream of validation. Strangers typed paragraphs praising her resilience. They commended her for cutting out negative influences. They celebrated her supposed billionaire status, dropping digital heart icons and applause emojis. The echo chamber was functioning flawlessly, shielding her from the terror of her actual circumstances. While the digital crowd cheered, I analyzed the invisible timelines converging on that specific casino floor. The physical flash drive I submitted to the Enforcement Division of the Nevada Gaming Control Board required a mandatory administrative review period. Regulatory bodies function on strict procedural tracks. They cross-reference evidence, verify timestamps, and consult with legal counsel before initiating contact with a licensed gaming entity. Friday evening represented the exact expiration of that procedural window. The primary target of that regulatory contact would not be my sister. It would be Victor Cross. Victor is the legitimate apex predator in this specific hospitality ecosystem. He is the authentic billionaire who holds 98% of the voting equity in the Aura Resort. He builds towers, secures international financing, and views his properties through a lens of risk mitigation. He gifted Ruby a microscopic 2% non-voting share simply to generate organic social media marketing. She was a negligible line item in his promotional budget. When state regulators contact a casino magnate regarding felony identity theft and shadow syndicate embezzlement tied directly to his property, the magnate does not defend the influencer. He amputates the infected limb to preserve the host organism. Victor possesses a team of ruthless corporate attorneys. Those lawyers would have spent the afternoon verifying the receipts I provided to the state. They would have traced her offshore routing numbers and confirmed her default with the Paradise lending ring. Simultaneously, another unseen variable was approaching critical mass. The Vanguard Syndicate issued a margin call due on Friday. The sun had set. The standard banking channels remained locked down by my federal injunctions. The operatives who stood on my porch on Thursday recognized that Ruby possessed hidden dividends. They also understood she was currently incapable of accessing those funds due to the government freeze. Watching their delinquent debtor host a lavish celebration, drinking expensive champagne on a live global feed, while owing them $250,000 was a direct insult to their authority. Criminal organizations rely on fear to enforce their contracts. Public disrespect is the one metric they cannot tolerate. The tension radiating from my laptop screen was palpable. It felt like watching a designated demolition site where the charges were already wired. The audience was practically holding their breath, intoxicated by the glamour and the drama. I was holding my breath for an entirely different reason. I took a slow sip of the iced water. The condensation on the glass felt cold against my palm. I did not feel the urge to intervene. There was no requirement for me to type a single word in the chat or send a final warning text to her device. The beauty of a properly executed forensic trap is that it requires zero maintenance once the final parameter is set. Ruby stepped closer to the primary camera lens. She raised her crystal flute, signaling for a toast. The ambient music in the lounge dipped slightly to accommodate her voice. She stared directly into the lens, projecting a rehearsed expression of serene strength. She thanked her fans for their unwavering support during a difficult personal trial. She utilized popular therapy language, claiming she was manifesting positive energy and refusing to let insecure relatives derail her empire. The sheer arrogance of the monologue was breathtaking. She was attempting to rewrite reality while standing on a trapdoor. I watched the scrolling user icons in the chat interface. I was not waiting for a specific time on the clock. I was waiting for a specific participant to join the broadcast. The bureaucratic and criminal dominoes I had arranged over the past 4 days were swaying heavily. The momentum was irreversible. The final push was imminent. The digital ecosystem of a live broadcast is a fragile construct. It relies entirely on a shared agreement between the creator and the audience. The creator projects an idealized version of reality, and the viewers willingly suspend their disbelief in exchange for entertainment. When that delicate consensus shatters in real time, the resulting spectacle is unforgettable. I sat in my quiet living room, watching my laptop monitor as my sister performed her final act. She executed a slow, deliberate twirl for the primary camera lens. The sequins on her designer gown caught the ambient lighting of the high-limit lounge, scattering prismatic reflections across the video feed. She held her crystal flute near her collarbone, projecting the exact image of a triumphant young mogul. She began a rehearsed monologue about building a billionaire empire from the ground up. She claimed her success was the result of relentless determination and an unwavering commitment to her personal truth. The sheer audacity of her statements was a psychological study in cognitive dissonance. She stood on a floor she did not own, wearing clothing she purchased with stolen funds, while actively avoiding a federal indictment. Yet her delivery remained smooth and confident. She had spent so many years inhabiting the fiction that she forgot the ground beneath her was rigged to collapse. The chat interface on the right side of my display was a blur of supportive text. Hundreds of thousands of users flooded the system with digital applause and words of encouragement. The scrolling speed rendered individual comments illegible. It was a solid wall of synthetic affection. To comprehend the magnitude of what occurred next, you must understand the operational mindset of a legitimate casino magnate. Victor Cross is not an internet personality. He is a recognized titan of Nevada commercial real estate. He built his wealth pouring concrete and acquiring distressed properties during economic downturns. Victor views the world through a strict calculus of risk and reward. He utilizes social media influencers the same way he uses promotional billboards. They are cheap marketing tools designed to drive foot traffic. The moment a marketing tool becomes a legal liability, Victor does not negotiate. He amputates the problem with surgical precision. State gaming regulators had contacted his corporate legal department earlier that afternoon regarding the physical dossier I submitted. His attorneys reviewed the offshore routing numbers and the forged secondary collateral agreement. They traced the illicit flow of capital from the Vanguard syndicate into the holding companies associated with his resort. Victor realized his unpaid promotional mascot had invited a federal investigation into his pristine gaming license. He chose to eradicate the threat, using the very platform she worshipped. The relentless scrolling of the chat window abruptly halted. The interface froze for a fraction of a second. A new comment appeared at the top of the feed. The system designated it as a pinned message, locking it in place so every viewer was forced to read the text. The username attached to the comment featured a verified blue checkmark. The profile belonged to Victor Cross, the authentic 98% equity holder of the Aura Resort. His message bypassed all public relations filters. It was a direct, lethal statement of fact. The text read, "You do not own this casino, Ruby. You own 2%, which is currently being liquidated to cover the $1.2 million you embezzled from Vanguard. Security is waiting for you in the lobby. Pack your things." The figure he cited revealed the true depth of her financial ruin. The original $500,000 loan had accumulated staggering compounding interest penalties and late fees. The syndicate had inflated the debt to a crushing $1.2 million. The digital crowd reacted with instantaneous whiplash. The supportive hearts and applause emojis vanished. The chat feed erupted into chaos. Thousands of viewers triggered their screen capture functions simultaneously, immortalizing the comment before anyone could delete it. The audience recognized the name Victor Cross. They understood the verified checkmark. They realized they were witnessing the real-time destruction of a carefully constructed myth. The comments shifted from adoration to mockery, confusion, and relentless interrogation. Ruby remained oblivious for exactly 14 seconds. She continued speaking to the camera, finishing her thought about overcoming adversity. She smiled, showing her perfect teeth. Then her eyes flicked downward toward the monitoring screen positioned below the primary lens. She intended to gauge the positive reaction of her fans. I watched the exact moment her cognitive processing caught up with the visual data. The confident smile fractured. The muscles in her face slackened. Her posture collapsed, as if an invisible weight had dropped onto her shoulders. She read the pinned message. She read the name Victor Cross. She saw the specific financial figures referencing the Vanguard syndicate. The color drained from her skin, leaving her looking pale and hollow. Her mouth opened, but she failed to produce a sound. She looked frantically toward the individual standing off camera, her entourage of paid assistants and sycophants. She was seeking a technical explanation, hoping someone would claim the account was hacked or the message was a digital glitch. The physical world converged with the digital disaster. The camera angle was wide enough to capture the perimeter of the velvet-roped VIP enclosure. Two men entered the frame from the left side of the screen. They did not wear the ill-fitting suits of shadow lenders. They wore the sharp, tailored uniforms of Aura Resort Executive Security. These were former law enforcement officers hired by Victor Cross to protect his multi-billion-dollar investment. They walked with purposeful, heavy strides directly toward the center of the broadcast. They did not care about the lighting or the live audience. They breached the perimeter of her curated fantasy. The taller guard reached forward, placing a firm hand on my sister's shoulder. His expression was stern and unyielding. Ruby flinched at the physical contact. She dropped her crystal flute. The delicate glass shattered against the polished marble floor. The sharp sound of breaking crystal echoed through the audio feed, piercing the ambient music of the lounge. She looked into the camera lens one final time. The expression captured in that last frame was a portrait of pure, unadulterated terror. The illusion was dead. The wealthy mogul was gone. Only a frightened debtor remained, facing the devastating consequences of her own actions. The security guard spoke a brief command, pointing toward the exit. The second guard reached toward the broadcasting equipment. A large hand covered the camera lens. The high-definition visual feed terminated instantly. The audio cut out a fraction of a second later. The live stream was replaced by a static black screen bearing a generic system message indicating the broadcast had ended unexpectedly. I sat in my quiet living room staring at the dark monitor. The silence was profound. The execution was flawless. My sister had utilized this exact social network to declare me dead to her family. She deployed her massive audience to publicly humiliate me and threaten my professional livelihood. She believed her digital kingdom granted her immunity from real-world consequences. The poetic justice of the moment was undeniable. The platform she used to launch her unprovoked war was the precise mechanism of her public demise. She was not dismantled in a quiet courtroom or a private office. She was stripped of her false empire in front of 200 dozen witnesses. Her followers watched the house of cards collapse in real time. The digital footprint of her destruction would live forever in server caches and viral screenshots. I reached forward and closed the lid of my laptop. The glow vanished, leaving the room bathed in the natural twilight of the Nevada evening. The first phase of the reckoning was complete. The golden child was dethroned. But the physical fallout was just beginning. The shadow lenders were still owed a vast sum of money. The federal investigators were still building their case regarding the fraudulent notary seal. The swift unraveling of my father's real estate brokerage was imminent. My family was about to experience the full, terrifying weight of the justice system they had tried so hard to outrun. They would soon discover that a blocked phone number and a locked door were the least of their problems. The true cost of their betrayal was finally coming due. The digital landscape is unforgiving. It took my sister half a decade to construct her flawless billionaire persona. It took her followers less than half an hour to dismantle it. The live broadcast termination acted as a starting pistol for a global forensic examination. Viewers mobilized with terrifying efficiency. A specific hashtag rapidly dominated the top trending metrics across all major social platforms. The phrase "Ruby ruined" became a centralized hub for crowdsourced investigations. Anonymous users achieved what my parents failed to do for 25 years. They held her accountable. Independent researchers dissected her historical video catalog frame by frame. They cross-referenced the serial numbers on her luxury handbags with known counterfeit databases. They traced the geographical coordinates of her tropical vacation posts and matched them to affordable short-term rental properties. The illusion evaporated under the heat of a million scrutinizing eyes. The public realized they had been worshiping a mirage. The adoration curdled into swift, relentless mockery. The digital mob she unleashed upon me had turned around and consumed its creator. While the virtual world burned, my physical environment remained serene. My mobile device rested on the kitchen island, the screen illuminated in rapid succession, displaying intercepted communication attempts. I had configured my operating system to automatically route incoming calls from my relatives directly to a secured, blocked archive. They were experiencing the terrifying isolation of a severed connection. The audio transcription software converted their frantic voicemails into sterile blocks of text. Reading a panic attack is a profoundly different experience than hearing one. The text removes the emotional manipulation. It strips away the tears and the wavering pitch, leaving only the raw, desperate intent. My mother left 4 messages in quick succession. The transcriptions revealed a woman clinging to a shattered reality. Linda demanded I contact the social network administrators and claim my account was hacked. She insisted I issue a statement calling Victor Cross a liar. She still believed a well-crafted public relations spin could override a federal crime. My father opted for a different approach. Thomas left a single, lengthy voicemail filled with hollow legal threats. He promised to sue me for defamation and corporate sabotage. He dictated the message while pacing his home office, unaware that his capacity to hire an attorney was already neutralized by the government. They were screaming into a void. I read the transcriptions with the detached interest of an archivist sorting historical documents. The emotional tether was gone. The weekend served as a brief, agonizing purgatory for the Golden Child and the Patriarch. Monday morning introduced the formal institutional response. State regulatory agencies do not respect the concept of family loyalty. They operate on a strict mandate of compliance and enforcement. The Nevada Secretary of State received the documented evidence regarding the fraudulent notary commission. Shortly after 9 a.m, state investigators arrived at the commercial real estate firm my father operated. They bypassed the receptionist and presented a search warrant. They did not raise their voices. They simply began cataloging physical files, hard drives, and communication devices. Helen, the office manager, who stamped the forged collateral agreement, folded under the pressure of imminent state prosecution. Employee loyalty evaporates when confronted with potential prison sentences. She surrendered her computer passwords and offered a full confession implicating Thomas as the architect of the forgery. My father watched his entire professional history get packed into sterile cardboard evidence boxes. His leased luxury sedan remained parked outside, while his legacy was systematically dismantled. Simultaneously, the federal apparatus executed the financial freeze. The routing prefixes I provided to the authorities triggered a cascade of international locks. The offshore shell accounts holding the illicit dividends were secured by government mandate. The electronic gates slammed shut, paralyzing their liquidity. This specific government action triggered a secondary hostile response from the criminal underworld. The illicit creditors operating out of Paradise recognized their collection window was shrinking rapidly. Shadow lenders understand that when federal agents seize a corporate entity, the unsecured debts are erased. The syndicate scrambled to salvage whatever tangible value remained before the government severed the entire estate. Operatives arrived at the suburban tract house and the luxury apartment. They did not bother knocking. They executed a quiet, ruthless repossession. They confiscated the keys to the sports cars. They seized the high-end jewelry and the designer wardrobes. They stripped the carcass of the family brand bare before the federal agents could even inventory the physical assets. The overlapping crises merged into a singular, crushing reality. The influencer was destitute and facing federal wire fraud charges. The authoritative patriarch was professionally ruined. The enabling matriarch was trapped in a collapsing social structure with no remaining capital to fund her country club memberships. They had gambled their survival on my inherent obedience. They assumed the quiet daughter would remain quiet and absorb the damage. They bet against the house without realizing I held the ledger. I stood in my quiet living room and surveyed the clean, orderly space. The chaos belonged to them now. It was no longer my responsibility to manage their anxiety or repair their broken systems. I tapped the screen of my smartphone, engaging the Do Not Disturb function. The device went dark, severing my final tie to the outside world. I walked to my bedroom, pulled back the linen sheets, and laid down. The hum of the air conditioning unit provided a steady, calming rhythm. I closed my eyes and experienced a profound, undisturbed rest. I slept perfectly, anchored by the indisputable power of my data. The truth had set the required boundaries. I woke up the following morning, prepared to resume my normal routine. The storm had passed, and the horizon was clear. I dressed in my standard professional attire, expecting a quiet Tuesday, analyzing routine spreadsheets at my corporate office. I poured my coffee and drove to the secure facility where I managed risk models for our high-net-worth clients. I swiped my access badge and headed toward my cubicle. I did not anticipate my firm executive board summoning me to the top-floor glass conference room the moment I arrived. The data I weaponized to save myself had just caught the attention of very powerful people, and my professional trajectory was about to take a sharp, unexpected turn. The automated glass doors of my corporate data analytics firm slide open with a quiet, mechanical hum. The interior temperature is regulated to a constant 68 degrees, regardless of the scorching desert heat radiating outside. It is an environment engineered for optimal cognitive function and sterile precision. Walking past the polished marble reception desk on Monday morning, I anticipated the standard corporate protocol. I expected a few sideways glances from colleagues who might have witnessed the digital inferno over the weekend. Corporate culture typically abhors public scandal. Human resources departments usually view viral infamy as a liability, regardless of who is factually at fault. I mentally prepared a concise, factual statement defending my continued employment and outlining my containment strategy. I never needed to deliver that defense. Before I even reached my designated workstation, my desk phone illuminated. The digital display indicated an internal routing from the top floor, the executive suite. A senior administrative assistant requested my immediate presence in the primary glass conference room. I gathered my encrypted tablet and walked toward the elevator bank. I calculated the severance package parameters in my head. I assumed the managing partners preferred to quietly sever ties rather than risk associative damage from a trending internet controversy involving a local casino. I walked into the boardroom. 3 senior partners sat around a sprawling mahogany table. Elias, the managing director, gestured to an empty leather chair opposite him. Elias is a man who speaks entirely in risk metrics and quarterly revenue projections. He does not consume celebrity gossip. He does not care about social media influencers or fabricated family drama. He cares about identifying systemic vulnerabilities and neutralizing hostile financial extractions. He steepled his fingers and looked at me across the expanse of the polished wood. He did not mention my sister. He did not ask about the viral video or the state of my emotional well-being. He pushed a printed document across the table. It was a comprehensive summary of the public filings regarding the Vanguard syndicate collapse and the corresponding state raids on my father's real estate brokerage. Elias explained that the firm routinely monitors the digital footprint of all senior employees. They traced the origin of the tactical data strike. They realized their own data analyst had systematically dismantled a notoriously dangerous shadow lending ring using nothing but public records, internet protocol logs, and sheer logistical precision. Elias articulated his perspective with clinical detachment. He stated that high-net-worth corporate clients pay our firm millions of dollars annually to protect themselves from corporate espionage and hostile financial maneuvers. He noted that my ability to weaponize administrative bureaucracy against an aggressive, localized threat was an invaluable asset. The partners did not summon me to the top floor to terminate my contract. They summoned me to harness that exact level of ruthlessness for their premier clientele. Elias offered me the position of director for their newly established corporate fraud division. The promotion included a substantial salary increase, lucrative equity options, and autonomous control over a dedicated team of forensic investigators. The contrast was sharp and deeply satisfying. My family had spent years chasing an illusion of elite status, accumulating illicit debt, and committing felonies simply to project an image of success. They lost their freedom and their assets trying to fake wealth. I achieved actual, tangible corporate elevation by systematically destroying their illusion with verifiable facts. Competence had finally outpaced extravagance. I accepted the offer without hesitation and spent the remainder of the afternoon migrating my files to a secure corner office overlooking the sprawling Las Vegas Valley. The transition from corporate elevation back to my suburban reality was grounding. I drove home and parked my vehicle in the assigned residence space. I walked to the community mailboxes located near the complex entrance. The metal compartments serve as a daily anchor to ordinary life. Amidst the promotional grocery flyers and standard utility bills, I found a thick envelope constructed from high-grade textured bond paper. The return address indicated a boutique law firm specializing in civil litigation located on the outskirts of the city. I carried the envelope upstairs and opened it on my kitchen island. It was a formal cease and desist order. The document was drafted on behalf of Thomas and Linda. The legal jargon was dense, designed to sound intimidating, but the underlying message was remarkably pathetic. The attorney demanded I refrain from publishing, broadcasting, or sharing any further proprietary family secrets. The letter threatened immediate civil action for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress if I continued to discuss the events surrounding the casino equity or the forged collateral agreement. I read the document twice, dissecting the legal strategy. It was a hollow gesture. Truth remains an absolute defense against defamation in the American legal system. You cannot successfully sue a citizen for sharing receipts of a felony that the plaintiffs actually committed. Furthermore, Thomas was facing imminent personal bankruptcy and state criminal prosecution. He did not possess the financial resources to retain litigators for a frivolous civil suit against a well-funded corporate executive. He had likely paid a discount attorney a flat, nominal fee simply to draft the letter, hoping the formal stationery would intimidate me back into silent submission. They were still trying to use thin paper shields to block incoming artillery. I did not draft a response. Engaging with a hollow threat validates the sender and signals vulnerability. I walked into my home office and opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. I retrieved a fresh, physical manila folder. I placed the crisp legal document inside. Using a thick black marker, I wrote a single word across the top tab: irrelevant. I dropped the folder into the drawer and pushed it shut. The physical action served as a closing bracket to their attempts at intimidation. There was one final administrative task remaining to complete the emotional and logistical separation. Every employee at my firm is required to maintain an active human resources profile containing primary emergency contact information. For 5 years, the corporate system listed my parents. If I suffered a medical event or a catastrophic workplace accident, the corporate protocol dictated that Linda and Thomas would receive the initial phone call. They would be granted legal authority over my medical directives and recovery decisions. I logged into the secure employee portal from my laptop. I navigated to the personal details dashboard. I highlighted the text fields containing the names, addresses, and phone numbers of my mother and father. I pressed the delete key. I watched their digital footprint vanish from my permanent employment record. In their place, I entered the contact information for Elena, a trusted senior colleague who possessed a pragmatic, logical approach to crisis management. I clicked the save icon. The database refreshed instantly. The severing was now absolute. I had systematically removed their access to my finances, my reputation, and my physical safety. They could no longer reach me through phone calls, legal threats, or medical emergencies. The fortress was complete, and the moat was flooded. I closed the laptop and looked out the living room window. The neon lights of the Strip were beginning to glow against the darkening desert sky. The city was preparing for another night of manufactured fantasies and high-stakes gambles. My family had placed their final reckless bet and lost their entire stake. The immediate tactical war was over, but a structural collapse of that magnitude does not simply fade into the background. The consequences of such a public and legal catastrophe leave permanent scars on the participants. I needed to see how the dust settled once the initial shockwave dissipated. I needed to understand exactly what remained of the people who tried to sell my future to a shadow syndicate, before I could deliver my final message to the audience. 7 months have elapsed since the live broadcast terminated on the floor of the Aura Resort. In cinema, the narrative usually concludes the moment the antagonist is exposed. The screen fades to black, and the audience assumes justice operates on a swift, automatic track. In reality, the aftermath of a financial crime is a slow, grinding procedural march. It is measured in strict court dates, lengthy deposition transcripts, and rigid asset liquidation schedules. Before I detail the current coordinates of the individuals who attempted to sell my financial identity, please take a moment to interact with this broadcast. If this forensic approach to toxic family dynamics resonates with your own experiences, leave a comment indicating your city and state. Your engagement helps Luke Vengeance reach listeners who might need a blueprint for their own survival. Let us examine the current metrics of the former influencer known as Ruby James. The state gaming regulators and the Federal Cybercrimes Division offered zero leniency. When a citizen utilizes fraudulent secondary collateral to siphon funds from an illicit lending syndicate and routes that capital through commercial shell accounts, the federal government classifies the action as wire fraud. Ruby is currently facing multiple federal indictments. The prosecuting attorneys compiled a towering stack of evidence originating directly from the encrypted drive I dropped on my front porch. Her legal defense is consuming whatever meager resources she managed to hide. She no longer resides in a luxury penthouse overlooking the fountains. The shadow lenders seized her leased vehicles and her designer wardrobes to offset the exorbitant interest penalties on the defaulted margin call. She currently occupies a ground floor unit in a generic stucco apartment complex located miles away from the primary tourist corridor. The neighborhood is situated in the industrial sector of the city, where the ambient noise consists of delivery trucks rather than curated lounge music. The ring lights are unplugged. Her social media profiles are permanently deactivated by the hosting platforms due to verified violations of their fraud policies. The digital queen of the Strip is reduced to an ordinary defendant navigating the public transit system to attend mandated pretrial hearings. She traded a synthetic empire for a very real criminal docket. The architectural collapse of my father and his commercial real estate brokerage was equally systemic. Thomas spent his entire adult life projecting an aura of untouchable prosperity. He leased expensive cars and hosted lavish dinners to convince his peers he was a successful operator. The state regulatory raid dismantled that carefully maintained facade in a matter of hours. The investigators traced the origin of the notary stamp and uncovered the influx of illicit syndicate funds. The resulting fines and civil penalties eclipsed his remaining operational budget. Thomas formally filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection 4 months ago. The public disclosure of his insolvency functioned as a social execution within the Las Vegas business community. The developers and investors he spent decades courting instantly severed all communication. He was forced to liquidate the suburban house to satisfy the demands of his legitimate creditors. The man who ordered his own daughter to leverage her retirement portfolio to save his public image is now renting a modest duplex. He lost his prestigious country club membership. He spends his days organizing legal paperwork instead of closing high-profile property deals. The financial devastation forced my mother into the labor market. Linda had not generated a taxable income in over 20 years. She treated local social climbing as her primary occupation, viewing working-class individuals with thinly veiled disdain. Necessity eradicated her pride. She currently works as a front desk receptionist at a busy dental clinic in a suburban strip mall. She spends 40 hours a week wearing generic scrubs, answering ringing telephones, scheduling routine teeth cleanings, and organizing insurance claim forms. She must smile and offer polite greetings to the exact demographic of people she previously considered beneath her social standing. The empire of dirt they constructed together dissolved, leaving them to navigate the unforgiving realities of the working-class economy they always despised. My personal operational baseline shifted in the opposite direction. I stepped into the role of director for the corporate fraud division at my analytics firm. I command a team of dedicated investigators utilizing advanced algorithmic software to protect international clients from the exact type of predatory extraction my family attempted to execute. The promotion provided a substantial elevation in my compensation package, allowing me to upgrade my living situation. I recently purchased a penthouse condominium located on the upper floors of a modern high-rise building. I am sitting on my private balcony right now. The desert air is cooling as the sun dips below the jagged silhouette of the spring mountains. I am looking out across the glittering skyline of the Las Vegas Strip. For decades, that specific skyline represented a source of profound anxiety. It was the physical manifestation of my family and their toxic illusions. It symbolized the deceit, the extravagant lies, and the crushing debt they accumulated to maintain a mirage. I used to view those bright casino signs as monuments to their greed. My perspective has fundamentally altered. I sip my iced water and study the horizon. The neon lights no longer intimidate me. They do not represent a threat. When I look at the glowing facades of the luxury resorts, I see them for what they truly are. They are just predictable circuits of electricity. They are bundles of wiring routed through glass tubes, powered by alternating currents, following basic laws of physics. They are tangible, measurable mechanisms, stripped of all emotional weight. The city is a machine, and I understand exactly how the machine operates. I am secure. My professional reputation is elevated and insulated from their chaotic history. My financial portfolio is fortified. Most importantly, I possess a deep, enduring psychological peace. I do not flinch when my phone rings. I do not spend my weekends untangling their logistical disasters or absorbing their manufactured crises. I no longer serve as the invisible safety net for people who would gladly watch me fall. I step back inside my quiet home and slide the heavy glass balcony door shut. The ambient noise of the city fades into silence. I walk toward my dining area. The wooden table is set for dinner. There is one ceramic plate, one folded linen napkin, and one glass. There are no empty chairs waiting for guests who will inevitably arrive late or demand unreasonable favors. There is no space reserved for people who view affection as a transactional currency. A table set for one is not a symbol of isolation. It is a monument to self-preservation. It represents a boundary that cannot be breached. I sit down and prepare to enjoy a quiet meal in a home funded entirely by my own competence. It is enough. My sister told 3 million people I was dead to the family. She was right. I am. And it is the most alive I have ever been. The American dream has long been tethered to a very specific, deeply ingrained portrait of the traditional family. It is a narrative built on the foundation of unconditional support, a supposed sanctuary where children are nurtured, guided, and meticulously prepared for the rigors of the adult world. We are told, almost from birth, that the home is the one place where the masks we wear for society can safely be removed. But what happens when the home itself is the manufacturer of the mask? What happens when parents, the very architects of a child's reality, decide that the illusion of success is more valuable than the actual souls of the children they are raising? The story of Stella and her sister Ruby is not merely a tale of digital vengeance or spectacular financial ruin. It is a profound cautionary reflection on the catastrophic failure of parenting values. It strips the glamorous neon-lit veneer off the modern American pursuit of status and forces us to look at the rotting wood underneath the foundation. In a culture that increasingly equates visibility with value and wealth with moral virtue, the fundamental duties of parenthood, instilling honesty, ensuring fairness, and cultivating emotional awareness, are too often sacrificed on the altar of public perception. When we examine the deeply flawed dynamic constructed by Thomas and Linda, we see the tragic, all too common manifestation of the golden child and the scapegoat paradigm. This represents a failure of fairness at its most foundational cellular level. Fairness within a family structure does not necessarily mean giving each child the exact same material possessions. It means assigning equal intrinsic worth to their humanity. It means distributing grace, attention, and accountability evenly. Stella's parents did not love Ruby more than they loved Stella, at least not in any healthy, recognizable definition of the word. They loved what Ruby represented. Ruby was the glittering chandelier, the flawless proxy through which they could project their own desperate fantasies of wealth, importance, and relevance to their peers. Stella, conversely, was treated as the invisible utility line, ignored when functioning perfectly, and bitterly resented when she refused to provide the power to keep their illusions lit. This dynamic reveals a staggering, willful deficit of emotional awareness. True emotional awareness in parenting requires looking at a child and seeing a separate, independent human being with their own fears, boundaries, and right to a secure future. It requires the empathy to recognize when a child is hurting and the humility to admit when the parent is the source of that hurt. Thomas and Linda did not see their daughters as people. They saw them as assets in a ledger. They weaponized Stella's competence and exploited her quiet reliability, grooming her from an early age to be the perpetual safety net. In doing so, they committed the ultimate parental betrayal. They commodified their own child. They failed to recognize that a child's obedience and loyalty are not natural resources to be mined until they are utterly depleted. A traditional family structure, no matter how beautifully painted the house is on the outside, collapses the moment love becomes conditional upon a child's utility. Furthermore, their narrative underscores the lethal absence of honesty in modern familial structures. We often teach children that honesty is simply the act of telling the truth when asked a direct question. But true honesty, the kind that anchors a child for life, is the practice of living authentically. Thomas and Linda built an entire ecosystem of deceit. They encouraged Ruby to borrow against a non-existent empire, enabling a lifestyle funded by shadow syndicates and predatory debt. They taught her that looking wealthy was far more important than being financially stable. Instead of guiding their youngest daughter toward the dignity of honest labor, the resilience of earning one's keep, and the quiet satisfaction of living within one's means, they applauded her descent into fraud. They preferred a daughter who was a heavily indebted fiction over a daughter who was ordinary and real. When the parents crossed the line into actively facilitating the forgery of Stella's signature, they transitioned from failing guardians to active predators. They sacrificed the innocent child to save the guilty one, completely inverting the protective mandate of parenthood. They proved that their family responsibility extended only to the preservation of their own egos. Long-term guidance, the true, enduring responsibility of any traditional family in American culture, is about preparing a child to survive the storms of reality. It is not about building a paper house that collapses at the very first gust of wind. Parents are tasked with outfitting their children with an unshakable moral compass, teaching them that actions have undeniable consequences and that integrity is the only currency that does not depreciate over time. By shielding Ruby from the consequences of her vanity and by attempting to force Stella to absorb the devastating punishment of those choices, the parents ensured the destruction of their entire lineage. They raised one daughter who was utterly incapable of surviving the real world without a script and a filter, and another daughter who had to surgically sever her own roots just to breathe. This is the ultimate failure of family responsibility, leaving your children entirely unequipped to face the truth. Stories like these echo in the quiet, unacknowledged corners of so many homes. They ask us to examine the hidden ledgers we keep in our own relationships. Who are we asking to carry the invisible burdens so that others can shine? What grand illusions are we funding with our silence, our compliance, or our fear of conflict? If you find yourself drawn to these explorations of the shadows lurking behind closed doors, if you appreciate narratives that peel back the complex layers of duty, betrayal, and ultimate reclamation, I encourage you to subscribe and follow Luke Vengeance. We delve deep into the messy, unspoken truths of human relationships, providing a space for reflection, recognition, and the quiet satisfaction of justice served. Join our community as we continue to shine a light on the stories that demand to be heard. As we step back from the total wreckage of Stella's family, we must confront a difficult, profoundly uncomfortable truth about the nature of unconditional love and familial duty. We are universally taught that family is a permanent sanctuary, an unbreakable bond forged in blood that must be preserved at all costs. We are instructed by society, by religion, and by cultural conditioning that forgiveness is a moral imperative, and that to walk away from one's own parents or siblings is an unnatural, unforgivable act of selfishness. We are told that blood is thicker than water, a phrase weaponized to demand endless endurance in the face of relentless abuse. But perhaps we have been reading the map of human relationships completely upside down. Perhaps the most profound act of love and preservation one can commit in a toxic family structure is not to stay and absorb the poison, but to leave and let the structure fall. We assume that loyalty is the highest virtue a child can offer a parent. Yet when loyalty requires the sacrifice of your own identity, the destruction of your own security, and the slow erasure of your own soul, it is no longer loyalty. It is a slow, silent suicide, masquerading as virtue. Conventional wisdom demands that we set ourselves on fire to keep our families warm, operating under the delusion that our ashes will somehow be respected. But the truest, most terrifying lesson we must learn, the philosophy that fundamentally redefines what it means to be responsible to oneself, is this: walking away from the people who gave you life is sometimes the only undeniable proof that you truly deserve to live it. The empty chair at the holiday table is not a tragedy of abandonment or a failure of love. It is a silent, enduring monument to a child who finally learned how to protect themselves when the very ones assigned to do it refused.